first things first, before we get accused of politicizing this, can you tell us who commissioned this survey?
The survey is part of our non-commissioned quarterly OCTA Research Tugon ng Masa survey. So we conduct it every quarter. It's a nationwide face-to-face survey with 1,200 respondents. So the margin of error is plus minus 3%.
Okay, so this is non-commissioned, not commissioned by any political party or group. The big story this time around seems to be, well, the fact that Vice President Sara Duterte's trust and performance ratings have been on the decline. We heard from your colleague, Professor Ranjit Rai, who says that this is now a trend. What do you think?
Well, if we're going by the previous 2 quarters, we could definitely call it a trend. But the trust and performance ratings are very dynamic, and they can change at any time. So what I mean to say is, and I'm not making any corrections to what my colleague said, but I just want to make it clear that trends can also change directions, and this can happen depending on what the personality does. Sometimes they might do something that's approved by the public, and then that could maybe earn them better trust numbers. Of course, at this time, this is what we're seeing over the previous quarters, and this was conducted September 4 to 7, even before these events that were mentioned in the headline. I think around this time in early September, we were having these Senate and Quadcom hearings on the budget. So I think the numbers may have been affected by these hearings that we had in early September.
Okay, your standard deviation is a plus or minus 3%. I remember in the previous edition of this survey, after the second quarter, there were already some declines, but it was still within the margin of error and therefore quite, quote-unquote, unremarkable. Can you explain to us the technicalities, Guido, behind this plus or minus 3% margin of error that you have, or some people would call the beta or the deviation? And is that also computed with the amount of people that you surveyed, which in this case is 1,200?
That's definitely very correct, Sean. So the margin of error, it depends on the sampling and the number of respondents. So if we can increase the number of respondents, let's say to 2,400, we might be able to decrease the margin of, we would be able to decrease the margin of error to down to about 2%, which would mean, that the results would be more reflective of the population response. You did mention that the decrease in the previous quarter was within the margin of error. And right now, even though we see a dip in the numbers of the president and maybe the House Speaker, these are within the margin of error of 3%. Unfortunately, for the Vice President, her numbers dipped below the 3% margin of error. So for trust, it went down from 65 to 59, and for her performance, it actually went down from 60 to 52. So that's an 8-point decrease. Although, as you mentioned, her numbers remain stable, or she remains popular in the Mindanao area and partly in Visayas area. We know which parts of Visayas that would be, but her numbers have been affected in NCR and Balance Luzon, and that's where she's been seeing most of her decrease in trust and performance.
Guido, apart from the Senate and Quadcom hearings, what else did happen between the period of September 4 to 7 or in the third quarter that could have possibly affected or caused that significant drop?
Well, it was mostly that, and there were already significant, a significant divide between, the two camps, even by September. I mean, it happened even way before then. We remember that during the SONA, and in fact, our previous quarter survey did not capture the effects of SONA. Wherein the Vice President decided not to attend the SONA. and made some remarks about that. So this is actually the quarter that reflects, you could say, the effects of her not participating in the SONA, because we had our previous survey around June, and that was before SONA. So those were some of the events that may have affected the response of the respondents.
The souring of the relationship between the president and the vice president happened during that time, correct? And Professor Ranjit Rai a while ago said that when there are 2 consecutive months where you see a significant drop, that represents a trend. But as reflected in our statistics and numbers a while ago, the vice president's numbers have been dropping since the 87% level, that high in March of last year. Hasn't this been going on for quite a long time already?
Actually, it has been going on, and I think from what I heard of my colleague, what he said, and I just want to clarify it, I think he did mention that it's been 2 quarters wherein the president has had higher trust and performance ratings compared to the vice president. So, but you're absolutely correct. The numbers have been declining since 2022, since when we first started tracking the trust and performance of the president and the vice president. The president's numbers saw some decline from 2022, but there was some bounce back, and it's remained quite stable, at least over the past few quarters that we've tracked it. But for the vice president, we've seen a decline somewhat, and you can see that in the graph there, that the decline is somewhat consistent, and you could probably call it a trend at that.
Okay, what actually jumped out at me is the fact that I believe this is the first time when Sara, surveyed lower than the president in terms of trust, in terms of performance.
No, it's
in terms of
in the past
trust.
2 quarters.
That he was.
She had started surveying lower already.
But now it's now significant, right? It's the
enough.
first time that it's significant. 6 percentage points down, 8 percentage points down for performance. Could we say that there is a specific tipping point when you look at the line graph? Like, at which point did it really start to go south for the vice president?
Well, and you're correct there that even though she tracked lower than the president in the previous quarter, they were still relatively close. I mean, within the margin of error, at least in terms of maybe trust. But and probably the tipping point occurred about early this year, I believe, and that's when her numbers decreased below the 70s level down to about the 60s. But again, of course, like I said, trends are not necessarily permanent, and there could be some things that they could do to raise their trust and performance or approval ratings again. But we'll have to see how that transpires within the next quarters.
But actually, what's further to Sean's point, 59% is dangerously close to 50% now. And once it goes under 50%, we can no longer say majority of Filipinos trust the vice president, right? What do you think? Is it heading in that direction?
Well, her performance is already down to 52, so yes, it's still slightly in the majority. And of course, if we compare those who trust her versus those who do not trust her, you could say that more people trust her compared to those who do not trust her, because there's always going to be a number of respondents who refuse to answer the question or who will say no comment. But yeah, I mean, dipping below 50 is, it's not really a good sign. And if comparing it, let's say, to U.S. Approval ratings, which I also tracked and monitor, when when the disapproval is above 50, that's usually very dangerous for a sitting president, because that means majority of the people do not approve of the direction. But and going back to the point, it is, of course, it should also be noted that the vice president is currently not directly part of the administration because she's distanced herself from that. So you know, comparing her to the president would be, you know, like apples to oranges at
Yeah.
this time because
Yeah.
she's not really part of the administration, while the president is part of the administration and he's, you know, steering the direction of the administration. So his approval ratings will sort of reflect the performance of the administration, whereas the president does not.
Does it say that kahit mag-aaway itong presidente at vice president, na ayaw ng mga Pilipino na hindi nagkakasundo when it comes to governance? Because a while ago I was listening to Professor Ranjit, and he was saying that there's a growing preference amongst Filipinos for candidates who don't
Espouse
participate in negative
unity?
politics, yung hindi sinisiraan yung ibang kandidato at talagang nagtatrabaho na lang.
Moreover, this is completely in contrast to what they promised, which is unity, right? And then now, well, clearly, that's a thing of the past. So, do we see these reflected in the numbers, like definitively?
Definitely. I agree with all that you said, Sean and Gretchen and Regina, that the Filipinos prefer candidates or, you know, politicians or, you know, government officials who just focus on the work. And right now we have challenges, and we can't deny that. I mean, we're facing some, you know, challenges as far as inflation, food security, public health, and a lot of that. And the Filipinos would rather that the you know, those in charge just focus on these challenges rather than, you know, having arguments or fights. And how do we know that? Because at the start of, you know, I mean, of their terms in 2022, after May 2022, both of the president and the vice president enjoyed high trust and performance ratings, above 80%. And they've seen, both of them have seen a consistent, or I would say steady, but, you know, both of them have seen a decline in their trust and performance. But maybe right now it's affecting the vice president more so than the president. And, you know, in part because, like you said, tama kayo, you know, the public doesn't like these fights, and would just rather we focus on the problem at hand.
Yeah, Guido, the graphic that we're flashing right now whilst you were talking of the vice president distrust number. So it isn't just the fact that she's lost trust, it's also the fact that her distrust numbers are rising. So if you take a look at that, in NCR, it's plus 4 points from the last survey. Highest, there was a jump in Visayas. There was a increase of 11 points compared to second quarter. Typically, that strikes me as a bit strange because she always strong in Visayas, and does that mean something to you?
Well, she's been strong in Visayas, but mainly, I think, based on the data that we see, she's mainly strong in the Visaya area. But, you know, the Visayas is composed of, you know, regions, and that includes the Ilonggos. And from what I'm seeing, the Ilonggos are, I mean, she's not really that strong right now with the Ilonggos as far as I can see from the data. And also with the Eastern Visayans also. So I think she's maintaining her, let's call it, you know, her base in Mindanao and in parts of Visayas. But so the other parts of Visayas may have seen some decline in trust or an increase in distrust, and you know, but maybe she's still holding on to the trust and performance in Mindanao and mainly, I believe, in Central Visayas.
But the landscape is shifting.
I was gonna ask you, like, is there kind of any signs that her Vis-Min numbers are showing that she's just solidifying her existing base there? Na matagal na naman nating alam that's already where she's strong.
Well, yeah, she's. I mean, it's fairly consistent. She hasn't lost a lot of ground in Mindanao. In fact, you know, you could see that she enjoys 1% distrust in Mindanao. But you know, my observation here is, you know, a lot of people in local areas, they also tune into local news, and the way local news is delivered may be different depending on the locality. So, the news could be framed differently in Mindanao and maybe in parts of Visayas. So that's how I see it. But of course, in the NCR, we frame news here in the same way. We frame it in TV5, so fairly consistent. But yeah, I wouldn't say that they're strengthening their base. I think their base is stable right now, but they're losing ground in NCR and Balas Luzon, from what I can see.
Given the most recent happenings with the former president in the Senate and also the recent press con of the Vice President, medyo magkasalungat yun eh. Parang sinasabi nila, si former President Rodrigo Duterte medyo positive kasi nabigyan ng platform para mapakinggan sila. Pero kabaliktaran, dun na sa nangyari kay Vice President. How do you see that affecting the numbers in the next quarter, given how we know the population and how they perceive politics and how they want to focus on the work?
Well, it will be interesting to see what will happen, and it would be difficult to make the prediction at this time. But I mean, I won't say difficult or impossible, but right now there's like you mentioned, there's a difference between the former President Duterte's how he's handling the situation and the Vice President how she's handling the situation. There's a difference in their messaging and in how they're delivering the messages. So it would be interesting, but based on the sentiment analysis that we're seeing, especially for the Vice President, with the distribution of the positive and the negative responses to these recent events, we sort of have an idea of what the direction would be as far as her trust and performance for the next quarter. I can't claim that now, but we'll probably see na lang next quarter how it affects the numbers.
You keep saying that approval and performance ratings are all dynamic, that it could change at any time, and that people's sentiments could turn. But have you ever actually seen that happen for anyone, for them to come back in a major way?
I know, I was thinking, are we that fickle? Like it would take just one thing, one big thing, to change everything.
I think we're fickle, but you have a good point, Regina. I'm not sure if we've seen it, dramatically shift in direction, like an inflection. So usually they tend to, be more of stable or, changing slightly in a certain direction. For example, former President Duterte, he enjoyed high trust and performance ratings for about 4 to 5 good years, wherein he was in the 80s to 90s. It just started to decline in his 6th year, but that may have been caused by certain, additional events like COVID, etc., and the inflation that's already starting at that time. So, looking at historical data on trust and performance, even for other countries like U.S. presidents, it's difficult to find an example wherein there was a sudden change, that it changed reverted in a different direction. But again, we'll have to see. I mean, we can't say something is impossible because we haven't seen it yet. But so far, the history shows that trends have been moving in a certain direction. They will usually continue to move in that certain direction.
I'm sure it's going to be an uphill climb for her. We're going to have to leave that there for tonight. Thank you so much for helping us make sense of the numbers. That was OCTA Research Fellow Professor Guido David.